That's me, Jimmy Venables, master in my own home. I get divorced and end up with custody of my mother-in-law. And she worships me, by the way.
Brat.
Model father. What are you doing here?
I live here.
Yeah, right. See what I've got to put up with.
After You've Gone, brand new comedy starts tomorrow at 8:30 on BBC One.
Teenage hormones can leave you feeling out of step with the world, so imagine how difficult it would be if you suddenly became a parent. 5 teen couples take over full-time care of other people's babies, toddlers,
You're gonna listen?
and elderly relatives. Will it all end in tears? A series of films about the extremes of teenage Britain continues with The Baby Borrowers tonight at 10:30 on BBC Three.
Iraq's a mess, Diana's still dead, and Jade Goody's thick. That's the headlines. Now you don't need to watch the news. You can turn over and see Mock the Week instead, over on BBC right now.
This is BBC One. Now the 10 o'clock news with Hugh Edwards and Azad Ahmed.
Interest rates are up again as the Bank of England fights to control inflation. It's the third rise since last summer, but this one took pretty much everyone by surprise.
Rates have been raised by 1/4 point. That is a very big shock.
We'll be asking whether this means that further increases are now likely. Also tonight, showing the strain, the new Bush strategy on Iraq is criticised by his own side.
This speech given last night by this president represents the most dangerous foreign policy blunder in this country since Vietnam.
In the North Sea tonight, a big rescue operation as a gas rig could be hit by a drifting cargo vessel. How the NHS is losing the battle against the superbug MRSA. And for $1 million a week, David Beckham signs up for an American side.
People be turning around saying, well, he's only going there to get the money. You know, it's not what I'm going out there to do. I'm going out there to hopefully build, you know, a club and a team that has got a lot of...
A night away from home for hundreds of people after flooding.
Good evening. The cost of borrowing has gone up again for the third time since last summer. The rise had not been expected. The base rate is now at 5.25%. That's the highest level for over 5 years. The Bank of England is concerned that inflation is persistently high, but some experts are warning that with household debt at record levels, higher interest rates could start to cause some real problems. First tonight, our economics editor Evan Davis has this report.
Surprise as the news dropped onto the screens at exactly midday.
Let's just have a look at this. They have been raised. Rates have been raised by 1/4 point. That is a very big shock.
And surprise across the system. They thought rates might go up next month when the bank publishes its inflation report. The stu up 1 cent against the dollar. So, on what is a serious message? Inflation is above target and has the economy down. Why? Because in the last 3 months, it's probably grown at the equivalent of an annual rate of 2.8%. That's fast growth. And then wage settlements. The few we've had this month have averaged 4%, higher than last year. And of course, house prices are frothy, up 3.3% in just 3 months, a totally unsustainable growth rate. The job of the Monetary Policy Committee at the Bank of England is to worry only about inflation. But consumers are key. If we spend too much, inflation tends to rise. Consumers like Jackie Thomas. Her mortgage is over £160,000. Her payments should now rise about £40 a month. She's doing some maths already.
I don't want to put myself in a financially difficult position, and I'm seriously thinking now about whether I should just sell it and take the capital and move on and just live with my boyfriend in a larger place.
For business, the rate rise is not particularly welcome. If rates add to consumers feeling the pinch this year, companies will feel it too. So where now? Well, in a poll of 50 economists last week, only one forecast a rise. This is the one, and this is what he says about the next move.
I think these higher interest rates will slow the economy to some extent, and inflation also may well come down towards the middle of the year. So there's a chance that rates can now be on hold until the end of the year, although the risks probably are still to the upside.
Higher interest rates are meant to cure higher inflation. They have a good chance of doing so. But for Britain's borrowers, higher rates just add to the pain. Evan Davis, BBC News.
Well, Evan's with me now. Evan, given what you said there about inflation, given the fact that nobody expected this one, well, virtually no one, what are the prospects?
Well, Mervyn King, the governor of the bank, says don't try to predict rates by looking at his eyebrows or looking at the tea leaves. Read the data. And the data did point to today's rise, so maybe we shouldn't have been that surprised by it. I think next time there are two arguments. On the one hand, inflation might fall of its own accord. Energy prices have pushed inflation up by about 1 percentage point over the last year. They're not still going up, energy prices. If they stop going up, then that'll drop out. Inflation might start falling again. On the other hand, a strong economy tends to drive inflation higher, and this economy has been strong, and everything the bank has done to kind of slow the house prices, slow consumer spending, hasn't done much. It's a bit for them like landing a balloon on a windy day. Just as they think they're getting it down, it sort of blows away again. So I don't think we should be surprised if they go up, and if you twisted my arm, I would say there's probably another rise still to come.
OK, then, thank you very much. In Washington, President Bush has faced widespread criticism after he announced plans to send an extra 21,000 troops into Iraq. One senior Republican said it was the most dangerous foreign policy blunder since Vietnam. The White House has warned that the Iraqi government is on borrowed time and must help to get the violence there under control. Our correspondent Matt Fry reports from Washington on the military and the political gamble being taken by the Bush administration.
All right, man, your gloves. I want to see one pair of gloves.
Put yourself in their shoes. Off to Iraq, the first batch of the president's surge of fresh soldiers, heading to a country torn apart by violence, leaving one torn apart by doubts.
He wears a Medal of Honor.
While they pack, the man who is sending them to save the war and his legacy could be found praying in the East Room of the White House. Visibly moved, the commander-in-chief was bestowing the Medal of Honor on their son, Marine Corporal Jason Dunham, a young man who threw himself on a grenade near Baghdad to protect his fellow soldiers. The timing couldn't have been more poignant. Only 12 hours earlier, the nation had heard a call for more sacrifice and an overdue confession.
The situation in Iraq is unacceptable to the American people, and it is unacceptable to me. Our troops in Iraq have fought bravely. They have done everything we have asked them to do. Where mistakes have been made, the responsibility rests with me.
But the public wants results, not contrition. As hot air belched into a freezing dawn, the opinion polls gave the speech a resounding thumbs down. On Capitol Hill, the season of inquisitions has kicked off. Yes, the Democrats are in power here. They've called for one hearing after another. But Condi Rice got the harshest grilling from disgruntled Republicans.
This speech given last night by this president represents the most dangerous foreign policy blunder in this country since Vietnam.
We don't want any more of our young men and women killed in a civil war between two groups that ultimately are never going to come together.
In another room, Robert Gates, the new Secretary of Defense, also found himself on the dock.
American patience is limited, and obviously, if the Iraqis fail to maintain their commitments, we will have to revisit our strategy.
Plan C, then, but how much more can the public tolerate? This man had clearly reached the end of his tether.
More lies! Still lying!
Privately, White House officials are telling me that they're already preparing for a possible Plan C, and that they have very little faith in the Maliki government to disarm its own militias. So perhaps the famous surge is really the last blast of an elaborate exit strategy. Matt Fry, BBC News, at the White House.
Well, the announcement of extra troops was welcomed by the Iraqi government in Baghdad, but one Sunni leader warned that the forces were needed because the Iraqi security forces had been infiltrated by Shia militia. Our correspondent Andrew North reports on the fight against the militia.
The Mahdi army on the march, the militia of anti-American cleric Muqtada al-Sadr. If this new plan has any chance of success, they have to be reined in. This is where the outcome will be decided, in their stronghold of Sadr City. But it will be the Iraqis in the lead, with the Americans providing support. There will be some targeted raids by US and Iraqi special forces. This is what they're up against. Bands of Shia gunmen who are blamed for much of the sectarian carnage. But Sadr City has been hit hard too by Sunni suicide bombers. More than 200 people died in this attack 6 weeks ago. The message was clear when we visited the area recently. People here look to the militia for protection. The Mahdi army is very important here, this man told me. They provide security and services like cooking gas and fuel. So this is just as much about winning people as winning battles. The Iraqi authorities will have to do more than the militia. This is the heart of Sadr City, this huge area in Baghdad that's home to some 2 million, mainly Shia Iraqis. And in effect, it's become a state within a state, because it's not under the control of the government, but the militia of Muqtada al-Sadr. The last resort, sending large numbers of US troops into Sadr City. For now, the Iraqi government says, give us one last chance to fix things.
If we don't demonstrate tangible progress, we would lose credibility in the eyes of the people of Iraq, the constituents that have elected this government.
And it's these Iraqi forces it hopes will do the job. But there are real fears they're still not up to it. Andrew North, BBC News, Baghdad.
Well, during the day, the Foreign Secretary Margaret Beckett said that Britain would not be sending any more troops to Iraq. And the Defence Secretary Des Brown said it could be possible to withdraw thousands of British troops by the end of this year. So let's talk to our political editor, Nick Robinson at Westminster. Nick, when you look at what Washington is up to and London is up to, they look like very different strategies now.
Now, you might think, Hugh, that sending in more troops, if you're the Americans, is the exact opposite of promising that you might halve the number of British troops on target, we're told, for next May. If you're taking the British position, not a bit of it, say ministers. They say, indeed, the Defence Secretary said that the policies were entirely consistent, because what's different, they say, is not the strategies, but the situations. In other words, in Basra, unlike Baghdad, there is not a religious war between Shia and Sunni Muslims. In Basra, unlike Baghdad, there is not a strong al-Qaeda presence. And in Basra, unlike Baghdad, violence is going down. And yet, Hugh, it's quite fun to play a game of political spot the difference. Do you remember this report, the Iraq Study Group? Tony Blair gave evidence to the group that drew it up and recommended that the Americans withdrew troops. Indeed, at the time it was published, he said, this report gives us a basis on which we can move forward. They could have put it on the back of the book. And yet President Bush has binned this report, and still ministers here say they agree with what he's doing.
Nick, in Downing Street, thank you very much. Now, a 4,500-ton cargo ship is adrift in storm force winds tonight in the North Sea and could well collide with a gas platform. The Vindo broke down this afternoon in very